Welcome to session 3 of the Empower Your Wellbeing course. I'm delighted to welcome you here because this session is going to be all about fats. It's an area that there is a lot of confusion about, a lot of misinformation, and we're here to dispel the myths and make it super clear and easy. We'll be looking at 3 different types of fat: saturated, unsaturated and trans fats, and it will sort of be all summarized into simple top tips on how to navigate this really effectively. We'll get another tool for reading nutrition labels, thank God, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about type 2 diabetes because it's kind of a big deal and not enough people know about it. Now, before we begin with the nutrition side, there's another Empower Your Wellbeing tool that I'd love to give you. So we've got our food talk and our awareness and bringing in that self-compassion to notice what's going on in our relationship with our body, ourself and food. And then last week you were given this tool of how to empower your well-being by using empowered language. The language of I am choosing, I am trying, yes I'd like that, no I wouldn't like that. For me, one of the big tools of empower your well-being is coming to this place of, yeah, that thing's nice, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it right now. So we're really coming into this sense of presence with ourselves and how it is we want to treat ourselves in that moment. Now, this is a perfect time for you to check in on how it's been since the last session. What's changed? Are you eating more fiber? Have you noticed a difference? How does your body feel? How does your mind feel? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Are you more full? Are you more satisfied? Are you noticing you're getting less sugar cravings? Are you noticing a little bit more the way that the advertising and all those things play games with us to get us and hook us into those patterns? Anything you're noticing, anything that's shifting, it's really good to kind of take hold of that and make some notes about it so you can really celebrate your own success. This is the tool we're going to be working with in this session. Now, in British culture, and maybe in the West in general, we have this strange polarization of where we're always putting ourselves down, we're always focusing on what's wrong, what's not working, what wasn't perfect, what wasn't right. And this slowly, I think of it like sandpaper, slowly erodes us down, And when we're on a course like this, looking at empowering our well-being, the most important and vital thing that we can do is to acknowledge what's working. And maybe if you want to push the boat totally out, celebrate yourself a little bit, celebrate those choices one by one. It's not like we assess the week and it's like, was it good or was it bad? We're coming into this place of right now I'm making a choice. And for example, there is a co-op near to me, and it's often the place that I find myself when I've sort of had a bit of a busy day and I haven't really sorted out some food, and I go into that co-op and there's an Elle of the past who would have been very tempted by the big bags of crisps and all the shiny packets and all the stuff. And now when I go in that co-op, I pretty much buy hummus and some Rivita crackers, that's like the staple, and then I might get some fruit, I might get some berries if I wanted to, or I could get some nuts, or I could get some dried fruit. And then when I find my way to the till and I see in my basket, whatever I've chosen, the colourful, the high fibre, the nourishing foods, I look at that basket and inside I'm a bit like, go me, go me, go me. I'm actively celebrating and giving myself a pat on the back, and you can do this in whatever way feels good for you. It's noticing what you're choosing, really engaging with it and having this little inner, wow, I'm really choosing good for me. I'm really choosing good. And we don't have to limit ourselves. It's not like, well, only if it's perfect I can do that. It's like, what is working? What is feeling good? And when we give ourselves back this little bit of acknowledgement, this little bit of feedback, it actually becomes generative. When we give ourselves positive feedback for what is working, we get a little inner buzz of, that's what I can do more of. And then we keep on doing more of it because it feels good. We have this entire, confusion of well, if I'm really beat myself up and if I'm really hard on myself, then it'll make me do the good thing or the right thing. And it's just not true. The harder we are in ourselves, the worse we feel and the more we seek comfort. And often that comfort is in, the shiny packet products. The other side of it is that when we're really hard and restrictive on ourselves, we might let ourselves become hungry or feel like don't have enough, that we're having lack, that we're not very abundant. And then once again, we turn to those things because they come in the big bags and that whole chemical side of it, the dopamine we talked about last week. So we're stepping into this place of reframing the way that we're focusing our energies, and we're noticing, what did I do today that was nourishing? What felt good? So please take your pen, take your paper, and write down a list of what worked for you, what did you notice, what did you swap, what did you add, what did you change. However small it feels, affirming and acknowledging what we're doing that feels good helps us step by step become more of who and how we want to be in our life in this nourishing, wholesome, and holistically delicious way. So take some time to do that now, and then we'll kick off this session. So in the last session, we focused on our first macronutrient, carbohydrates. Now we're coming to our second macronutrient, a nutrient we need in large amounts, and that is fats. So let's bring up our whiteboard. So when we're speaking about fats, we're talking about the nutrient. We are not necessarily talking about fat on the body. When we're talking about fat on the body, or people are talking about weight, this is the excess fat, the excess storage of fat that we actually don't need and that the body ideally would get rid of. So in this session, we are speaking about fat from a nutrient perspective. So we're talking about the fats that are completely essential for the healthy functioning of our body. The essential fats are those that support our brain and our entire body to function to the best of its ability. If we don't actually have the essential fats available to us, then we see higher levels of things like cognitive decline, issues with memory, and issues with mood. So getting our fats right is actually really, really important, and luckily for us, it's actually really simple. Now, let's speak a little bit about how fats are digested. We won't go into this in the same depth we did with carbohydrates last week, but just to get a little overview. And in a moment, I'll be speaking about bile, and that's something just to store in your mind because we will come back to it in the next session. So when we are eating fats, fats are a waxy substance. And when we eat them, we have the whole mouth, taste, sensation thing, and then the food comes down our esophagus and into our stomach, and from our stomach it goes into our intestinal tract. Now when we digest or trying to digest fat, say we eat something that's naturally got fat in, like avocado for example. So the avocado has a bit of carbohydrate, it's got some fibre because it's a plant, and then it's got these essential fats in that we'll come to look at later. Now your stomach actually can't break down fats. What happens is that the fats end up forming as little droplets inside the stomach. And this is because if you've ever done a bit of baking on a baking tray and you've maybe used a bit of oil and then you go to wash that baking tray, if you try to just wash the oil off with water, the oil and the water don't mix. And this is kind of the same in the stomach. The stomach is a water soluble place and the fat is not water soluble. So what happens is that we need an extra mechanism to support the body to digest these fats, and this is where stomach bile comes in. Now this bile has a very special mechanism for the digestion of fats. Now if we come back to our washing up, if we've got our oven tray with a bit of oil on it and we try to wash it off with water, it's not going to work. And then the minute we add some washing up liquid and we move it round, the washing up liquid binds with the fats and then they wash away. This is because it actually emulsifies the fats. If you imagine a droplet of fat and it gets this little coating around it and therefore makes it water soluble. This is exactly what happens inside the body. It's not washing up liquid, but it's bile. These fat droplets pass through the bile, they get a little coating of the bile, and then from there they can actually then be absorbed into the body. They take a slightly different journey. First they go into something called our lymphatic system, and then they're passed into the blood and then taken wherever they can be used in the body. This is one of the big reasons that we need to move. When we sit still, we've got something called lymph fluid in the body. So it sits inside our lymph vessels and it doesn't have a pump like our heart does. Our heart pumps all the blood around the body, keeping it moving right now as you're sitting. But your lymph, this fluid that contains all the toxins and helps our body to heal, it's the basis of our immune function. It's a really important part of the functioning of the body. And we need the lymph to move. And the way the lymph moves is when I move my arm, for example, you can see the skin and the muscle and how it's all moving. This pumps the lymph, it moves the lymph. Especially when we're walking, this is a really important way of moving the lymph up the legs so it can be cleaned in our lymph nodes. And if you want to read more about lymph, it's totally fascinating. But the bottom line of it is, if our lymph is stagnant, if we are stagnant and we don't move, then the lymph doesn't move and our immune system can't work properly. And it can actually end up being like quite full of fats, especially if you've eaten a very fatty meal. Then it makes the lymph very hard to move through the body because it's full of this waxy, oily stuff. So movement is really key, and balancing the way that we consume fats is really key. And we'll come to this as we go on. The important thing I want to talk about within this digestion is that if we eat a meal that contains a very high amount of fat, then rather than just having small amounts of droplets, we might have a great big droplet, I think of it as like a little fatberg. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the pictures of the sewers in London sometimes when they get a fatberg in them. It's when all the stuff that shouldn't be flushed down a toilet is, and it forms these huge masses in the sewers that some poor person has to go down into the sewer and like poke it with a stick until it's free and it can all move again. Now, this is what happens when we eat a very high fatty meal. We end up with this great big amount of fat trying to move through the digestive tract. And what actually happens in the body is that we feel maybe very heavy, we might feel very bloated, we might get this sensation as if the food is not going down. And that's because that is literally what's happening. Nothing's moving here in a very quick way. So if you are a person that gets particularly bloated or experiences any kind of digestive discomfort, avoiding very high fatty meals can be really useful for that. Now we'll speak about the different types of fats, but I'm really talking here, the oily things with very fatty meat or a lot of dairy or cheese or cream or things like that. These are the ones that are really causing the biggest digestive issues. So it's great to have awareness of that, because then you can really support your body to have the best of digestive health. So let's have a look at the different types of fats. So when we're speaking about fats, the most important part is to be able to have the essential fats that we fundamentally need for the function of the body. When we're talking about nutrition, the word essential means the body cannot synthesize or create this specific nutrient or structure, and therefore the body needs to be able to receive this thing from the diet, from the food we eat, our meals or snacks, whatever it is. So within the world of fats, the most essential fats that we must get, that the body cannot create, are the unsaturated fats. Now there are two main types of unsaturated fats, mono and poly. So mono unsaturated fats, which are called MUFAs, and poly unsaturated fats, which are called PUFAs. So we want to get our MUFAs and we want to get our PUFAs, and these include things you might have heard of, like the different omegas, like omega-3, omega-6, omega-9. So it's really incredibly useful to get these different fats in. The question then becomes, what is it they're doing in the body, and how is it we get them in the best way? Now, if we don't have the unsaturated fats, these are the ones that quite literally create our brain. Our brain is made of three main things: fats, protein and water, and if we do not get these essential fats, then the brain cannot create itself effectively. There's been quite a few studies on Alzheimer's and dementia where they get people to increase their unsaturated fats in their diet, and they see a slowing in the progression of these conditions. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we can actually prevent these conditions through the consumption of unsaturated fats. So these are a really, really, really big deal for our long-term brain health. But we also find that people that have unsaturated fats in their diet, they actually have a better mood and general well-being overall. So you can support yourself now and long into the future as well. So where is it we find these unsaturated fats in great abundance? And the answer is in nuts, in seeds, in olives, and in avocados. Now, it is completely true that fish and fish oil contain these unsaturated fats, and you'll see a lot of adverts about this. If you go in the health food store, you'll see lots of different things about this. The reason that I don't recommend them as a source of unsaturated fat is because of the level of pollution that's found now in all fish and fish oil. And this is largely to do with heavy metals and pollution in the waters and the oceans. This includes farmed fish. There was a study done in America looking at the different fish, and there wasn't a single form of fish that wasn't found to be contaminated with heavy metals and other pollutants. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that fish oil and fish consumption can actually impact things like our mental health, including suicidal depression and anxiety, especially when it came to things like seafood, like prawns. And there's also quite a lot of association between the consumption of fish and fish oil and hair loss. So I would say that this isn't the best place. They are here. The essential fats are in the fish, but we also get all this other baggage with it as well. Whereas when we have our nuts, seeds, olives and avocados, we're actually only getting more good stuff, because as we learned last week, whenever we're eating plants, we're eating fibre, and whenever we're eating fibre, we're supporting our entire digestive process. So adding in more of these can be one of the easiest and simple ways to sort out our unsaturated fats. Now, people always ask me, how much do I need? Ideally, around 2 tablespoons a day of either nuts or seeds or nut butter. I'd say this is a good minimum. Sometimes I have more than this, sometimes I have less than this. This is just a rough guideline. What I recommend is to have these 2 tablespoons a day of nuts or seeds or nut butter or whatever it is. I have quite a lot of tahini. I don't think I eat. Almost a single meal doesn't go by in which I don't have some tahini, so I'm a big fan. It's just sesame seeds made into a paste. It can be the base of all kinds of sauces and dressing. You just mix it with a little bit of hot water to get it to the texture you want it to be, and then you can add, whatever you want, herbs, spices, garlic, lemon, ginger, all the nice things to make a nice tahini dressing. Sometimes I even use it to make a pasta sauce. So tahini can be a great way of accessing nourishing and creamy flavors and textures, while also boosting and nourishing your body's well-being. What I would add to this is to have 1 tablespoon each day of something called flaxseed. Flaxseed is also known as linseed, same thing. And flaxseed has more of the omegas that you need in a much better balance than you find in fish oil. So if you were having fish oil for the omegas, this flaxseed can be like the best thing to swap to as well. Flaxseed has an incredible amount of useful properties for the body, and has actually been found to even reduce incidences and to be able to help people's bodies recover from things like prostate cancer. So this is a really big deal. When we eat the flaxseed, it's giving us the fibre, it's giving us the fats, and it's giving us a whole other range of micronutrients as well. Generally, I have the flaxseed in the morning because I find it a really easy one to add into things like oats or a smoothie. But I know some people that just sprinkle it on top of their food. Flaxseed actually absorbs water. So whenever you're having flaxseed, it is really good to have it with something that's already got moisture in it, so it can soak up some of that moisture. Or if you're adding more flaxseed in, you want to add more water to your body as well. So always keep in mind to have a little bit of extra water if you're having it without hydrating it. So when it comes to our nuts and seeds, 2 tablespoons a day and an extra spoon of flax, and then you are going to be giving your body the fundamental basis of what it needs for it to thrive long term in your brain and the rest of the body. If I was to give some, I don't use the word superfoods because they're all strange things in shiny packets from foreign countries, but if I was to say the superb foods that you could add in when it comes to fats, because of their research into brain health, walnuts, Brazil nuts, and for our bone health, almonds. These are the ones I would say are top tip for body health. And then for supporting mental well-being, and this is to do with an amino acid called tryptophan and helping it get into your brain, which is a whole thing we won't go into here. But if you want to support your mental well-being, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, and sesame seeds are some of the best thing for supporting mood. This is especially important if you're like me, before you bleed, maybe you get a bit grumpy or moody or have a difficult week or a few days. on those weeks before I bleed, if I have more sunflower, more pumpkin and more sesame seeds in the morning, so I go above this on those weeks, I notice a considerable difference in my tolerance, my patience and my general enjoyment of being alive. So I highly recommend sunflower, pumpkin and sesame seeds for everybody, but especially if you ever experience any kind of mood disturbance or mood irregularity. This is my top tips on adding in the best of the best of fats for your long-term mental and physical health. And this is where you can also get really creative, because as I said, using tahini to make sauces and things, nuts and seeds can also be a really great base for making sauces, dips and dressings. You just soak them in water, blend them up with the flavors that you want, whether it's garlic or a little bit of chili or whatever you're looking for, and then you can enjoy these nuts and seeds as part of a really delicious diet. So where does oil come into this? Nut oil or seed oil or olive oil. And this is where we have to talk about our second type of fat, which is trans fat. Now there are two main sources of trans fat. We have them in animal products. So anything from a ruminant animal will naturally have trans fats present in its meat or in its milk. So whenever we're eating things like dairy or beef or those kind of things, then we'll be having trans fat from those ones, which is naturally found in animal products. And then trans fats also happen when we take something like a nut, a seed, an olive or an avocado, and we put it through a process where we are extracting the oil. When we extract, we leave behind the fats, but take away things like the fibre and the other micronutrients. In this process of extracting the oil itself is then vulnerable to damage. It can be damaged by exposure to heat, light, and oxygen. And the more exposure it gets to these things, the worse it becomes. And when it's exposed to these things, it becomes something called an advanced glycation end product, which you can research more about if you want to. They're called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. So these are two different forms of trans fats that can come into the body, and we need to be aware of them because trans fats are what we would consider not essential. So the body has no requirement for them whatsoever. It's not a nutrient that we need to get into the body. And the World Health Organization did a piece of research on trans fats to try to find out, well, what happens when we eat them? Are they safe? Are they not safe? Because there's quite a lot of research attached to trans fats, that trans fats are actually a risk factor for things like cancer. So the World Health Organization did a piece of research and said, well, look at how much is safe. And what they found was that even having 1 gram of trans fat increased cancer risk and risk of other disease inside the body. And this is because trans fat seems to damage the way that DNA behaves. And if you change the way the DNA behaves, then we change the way that cells replicate. And if you change the way that cells replicate, there's a chance that they'll be replicating incorrectly. And this is what can lead to different types of cancers, tumours and other diseases in the body. When we see advanced glycation end products coming into the body, the acronym is AGEs, and this is often because it also causes advanced aging. So that's the physical signs of aging, but it's also the sort of the wear and tear on the toll on the body itself. So people who have less trans fats in their diet have healthier long-term and short-term health outcomes. So how do we manage this in our life? How do we work with this? The thing to make really clear is that the main area of risk of the trans fats when it comes to nuts, seeds, olive and avocado extracted oils is where they've had the high exposure to heat, light and oxygen. And this happens most actually in snack products. It's in those shiny packets, things like crisps, things like takeaway food, anything that's been deep fried or has become very oily or brittle. This is where we're seeing the biggest risk. Often when I talk about trans fats, people go straight to, oh, I can't cook with oil at home. And I'll speak about that, but it's really, it's important to consider. Say, for example, a person saying, oh, I won't have any more trans fats, so I'll stop putting oil on my salad. but then they're eating, digestive biscuits, which are made of oil, and all the other kind of like the bakery and the beige goods. We could be avoiding one thing, like the oil on the salad, and therefore eating less salad because it's less nice for us, while still having the things that have absolutely no nutrients in whatsoever. So we're being, in our empowered discernment here around where is it that it's best to focus. Now, if you wanted some top tips for trans fats and reducing your trans fat exposure at home, this is what I would say. So top tips for trans fat awareness. We all need a bit of trans fat awareness. In some countries they've been banned, but in the UK there was the decision that we can all decide for ourselves, which is good, isn't it? So it's good we know about it now. So the main thing with trans fats is that it's most commonly found in the snack products, inside the bakery things, and inside the kind of like fried stuff. This is the place to bring most awareness. Now, we're not saying I can never have these things, but we are saying, might I want to choose something else? Might there be an alternative? Now, when it comes to using oil at home, you might have noticed that in some supermarkets, they have oil that comes in a black bottle. Now, it comes in a black bottle because it's trying to protect the oil from light. So it's being protected from the light so it has less damage. You will also see that these are often what we call cold pressed oils, which means that they're extracted without the use of heat. In a lot of these snack products, they're combinations of a lot of different oils that have had a lot of exposure to light and a lot of exposure to heat, leading them to be the most high risk. So if we're using oil at home, having the black bottle to protect it from light and the cold pressed oils is one of the best ways to reduce the risk of harm. Now, if I am cooking with oil, it can be really great to ask the question of, well, for what purpose am I cooking with oil? Because often if we're just starting off a dish, and say we're frying some onions or something, you can actually do what I call water frying, and just start them off in a little bit of water and keep them moving, just the same as you would with the oil, and it actually brings out a very similar effect. So you could start off water frying. If you're cooking with oil, like you're roasting or you want a crispier edge, this is where it's probably one of the only modern mod cons of the kitchen that I recommend, and it's to get the spray bottle of oil. This is because that spray bottle can give such fine coating of oil to things that you're hugely reducing the amount of oil you're exposed to, and therefore reducing the amount of oil that can become damaged by the heat or the light. So swapping for the spray bottle of oil, and my preference is to kind of use rapeseed or sunflower. And now if I'm using something like olive oil has what we call a low smoke point. The smoke point of an oil tells you at what heat does it start becoming damaged and become an advanced glycation end product. Olive oil has a low smoke point, which means that it is best used raw. So if I'm working raw, I'll use olive oil, or otherwise I'll be using the spray bottle of rapeseed or sunflower if I really need it, and otherwise I just water fry it, or sometimes even dry roast as well, and you can still get a crispy edge on something dry roasting. This is the place to focus on though. The snack products, finding out what you want to swap to instead. And this is where nuts and seeds can be a really great swap because they're so satisfying and still give us that nice sensation of like the richness of the fattiness of it. And if you do want to take it into your home, then this is the thing to consider as well. Let's have a little look now at our third and final type of fat. So let's talk about saturated fats. Now, saturated fats are associated with mental decline. They're associated with damage to the liver and the other organs. And they're associated with inflammation in the body. Inflammation can be considered the precursor to nearly all disease. So the less inflammation we have, the better. What we're finding here is that saturated fats, they are not essential. The fascinating thing is that saturated fats are in the human body and they're really important in the human body. It's just that we make our own. We don't need to eat it from our diet. The body has got all the saturated fat that it needs. It's very capable. what happens is that when we eat the saturated fats, our body can handle a small amount, but it really doesn't need a lot. And when we have a lot of saturated fat, this is when we start to see the impact on our brain, impact on our organs, impact on our liver, and heightened levels of inflammation. All of this also then ties into things like irregular mood. So saturated fats are not only not essential, but the UK government actually has a recommendation of what they say is the maximum daily amount. Whenever we see something with a maximum daily amount, this is actually a warning. This is saying eat less than, eat less than. And it's recommended to eat less than 20 grams of saturated fat per day. This is our basis. So the UK government is warning us about this because it has such a detrimental impact on the body, and because saturated fats are such a big component of a lot of the products made available to us. So where are the saturated fats, and what is it that they're doing inside the body? So the main sources of saturated fat come from two places predominantly. There are some animal sources and there are some plant sources of saturated fat. Now, just like human beings, we have saturated fats in our body. Whenever we eat animal products, we're eating the saturated fats that were naturally inside their body. So we find it mostly in meat and dairy. When I say meat, I'm talking poultry as well, things like chicken and turkey. So meat and dairy are where we see the highest levels of saturated fat, especially in dairy. And we can maybe look at some labels to see how this pans out in nutrition label land. The other side of saturated fats is in the plants. And this is where, if you think about the oils we've already talked about, oils are liquid at room temperature. Now, saturated fats are solid at room temperature. If you think of, for example, butter. Butter is a solid at room temperature, but olive oil is a liquid at room temperature. This tells us, well, which is saturated and which is unsaturated. They named this because of the way that they are bonded on a chemical level, on a molecular level, and the saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So if you think about the different plants that maybe give us a fat or an oil that are solid at room temperature, they're the saturated ones. This includes coconut, this includes cocoa butter, and palm oil. Now, these three things are often used to create a specific type of texture in the shiny packet products. And I'm sure that there's maybe a bit of a shock to find out that coconut oil isn't essential or nutritious for you, because there's been so much stuff about the benefits of coconut. Coconut oil has been given such a lot of hype because olive oil is damaged when you cook it. So compared to olive oil, then coconut oil can be a better alternative for cooking at heat. That is true. However, it has been known for more than 30 years that the consumption of coconut leads to a heightened risk of stroke and heart attack directly because of this damage that the saturated fat causes. So what we're looking at here is, okay, where are we getting our information from and what are they comparing it to? So we always have to ask, compared to what? When someone says coconut oil is good, well, good compared to what? Because maybe it's good for cooking compared to using an extra virgin olive oil, but it doesn't mean it's good or nutritious for your health long term or overall. A lot of the time, these kind of products that get a lot of hype and a lot of marketing, it does come down to profit, and it does come down to somebody wanting to make money. So having that little critical eye, that little critical lens, where is this article coming from? What is the magazine getting from this? What is the newspaper getting from this? What is it they're actually trying to sell me? And often it's just another product on the latest trend, and it isn't actually connected to whether or not this deeply nourishes and supports us to feel really good in our body. So let's have a little sneak of what's actually going on when we eat saturated fat. So as we know, saturated fat is a type of fat that will go into the stomach and form the little droplets, then it'll be passed over to the lymph where it's broken down, and then it'll be passed back into the blood. So if we were to look inside one of our blood vessels, what we start seeing, and this happens in people as young as 10 years old in the UK right now, in the lining of these blood vessels, we start to see something called fatty streaks. Now, these fatty streaks are actually build-ups of fats, and they've got three ingredients, this kind of plaque. And one of them is saturated fat. the other we'll look at in the next session on protein. So this plaque is created from saturated fat, and this happens because the body isn't very good at storing it. If we were to look in the body and to look at the different fat cells, fat is stored in fat cells. No matter what size a person is, they don't have more or less fat cells, they just have more or less fat stored on the body. If we think of our unsaturated fats, our MUFAs and PUFAs, our essential fats, the ones that the body really needs, these actually store and stack really well inside the fat cells. This is why there's not a lot of correlation between eating MUFAs and PUFAs and excess weight gain. Whereas if we start to look at the saturated fats, what they do instead is they're really difficult for the body to store, and they overflow the fat cells very quickly and end up needing to be stored elsewhere on the body, because once they come into the body has to do something with them. So what happens is that these saturated fats quickly overflow the fat cells, and once that storage is full, then they end up storing here in the lining of the artery, causing this plaque to build up. Now this is a problem in the world of type 2 diabetes, and we're going to go on a bit of a journey here to find out how this is happening. So we begin by having, say we're in a digestive process. And in the digestive process, say for example, we've eaten something that's got carbohydrate in. So if we think back to our Rivita cracker last week, say we've eaten a Rivita cracker, what's hopefully going on is that glucose is coming into the blood. And the body is incredibly intelligent. The body is constantly monitoring the glucose level. It's monitoring our blood sugar level. And it does this because, as we found out last week, if our glucose level goes too high, it's a great damage and a great risk for the rest of the body. So the body is always monitoring the glucose level. And the reason that we want the glucose in the blood in the first place is to be able to allow our muscles and our brain to receive the energy it needs. So we ate the thing, the glucose comes into the blood, happy. Now the glucose wants to get to the muscle. The thing is, glucose and the muscle actually can't communicate with each other. They've got no way of interacting. So the body has an ability to create a certain hormone called insulin. So actually our pancreas is then stimulated. We monitor the glucose level. Then the body says, hey pancreas, we've got some glucose here. Will you please make some insulin? Now insulin pairs with the individual molecules of glucose in a very clever way. And through quite a chain reaction of events, the glucose and the insulin are then able to pass to the muscle. So we can think of insulin as being a key to the door to the muscles. So we eat the thing, the body signals that we need some insulin. The insulin comes and pairs with the muscle, and then what we do is we feel energized. We're able to concentrate or function or move or whatever it is we're doing that's important to us. And then the body returns to a low glucose level. And this is all good and fine. This is our ideal digestive process. Now, what happens if this digestive process is impacted by one of two things? One, it could be having a meal that's high in saturated fat. So within 2 hours of eating something that's maybe high in meat, dairy, butter, poultry, or even coconut, cocoa butter, or palm oil. So this is a lot in our bakery goods, again, all the beige stuff. Beige things often very high in these things. So if the digestive process either has a recent exposure to saturated fats, meaning that they'll be quite literally floating around in the blood, or if a person has got a buildup of this kind of plaque. Now you'll know if you've got a buildup of this kind of plaque in a concerning way if you're told you've got high cholesterol levels or high blood pressure. It's often an indicator of this plaque. Now if this is going on, something different happens. What we find happening instead looks a bit like this. So the body, as it's always been doing, is monitoring the glucose level. And it might notice, okay, there's some glucose here. Pancreas, please create some insulin. So the pancreas starts working and making some insulin. This is the key to the door. But what happens this time instead is that the insulin is actually blocked from being able to support the glucose to access the muscle. What happens instead is that the plaque either blocks and stops the access to the muscle, or the saturated fat itself confuses and interacts with this chemical process, this quite complex process of insulin being able to communicate with the muscle itself. So what happens then is this. We're monitoring the blood glucose level. The pancreas releases insulin. The insulin gets blocked. And then there's quite a chain of events from here. Because the insulin has been blocked, that means that the glucose level stays high. So then the body goes, well, I'm monitoring the blood glucose level. I made some insulin. It's not gone down. I must need more insulin. Now, in this more insulin phase, what we're starting to see here is that the pancreas is starting to get stressed. So we start seeing pancreatic stress because it's being overworked. So now if we were to look in the blood, we've got more insulin coming in, more insulin coming in. And if this is continuing, then the glucose level staying high is going to be causing risk to people's body and people's health. And long term, as this goes on and on, the pancreas gets more and more stressed and may actually even stop working. And the specific cells in the pancreas called beta cells, which saturated fats kill, which means that the pancreas can no longer even function the way it wants to long term. When we see this digestive process ending, what happens is that the body tries to clear the glucose as much as it can. And this is where maybe even some glucose will end up in the urine because the body's trying to flush out the blood. And in the long term of it, what we see is that a person lacks energy and focus. Because instead of the glucose being able to feed the brain and feed the body, it's not getting to the muscles, it's not getting to the brain, so it's not functioning properly. And they'll actually even feel hungry. Because there's so much insulin in the blood, this confuses and tips the body and makes it think that we need to eat. This process here is what we call type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes right now affects more than 4 million people in the UK, and it's kind of a big deal. Let's have a little look at it. So type 2 diabetes, in my opinion, should actually be called too much fat in the blood disease, because the underlying cause is the fat. It's not the carbohydrate. When a person has type 2 diabetes, they have to be careful of those glucose levels, but it's not caused by glucose. Glucose and carbohydrates, so carbs, are actually a symptom. They become an issue because of the type 2 diabetes, but the underlying cause itself is having too much fat in the blood. And the thing that's wonderful here is that most people with type 2 diabetes, the body will be able to heal and repair if it has the conditions in which to do so. And the ideal conditions are a low saturated fat diet and a high fibre diet. We'll talk a bit more in depth in the next session about how it is that high fibre helps the body to clear out the fat inside the blood. Going on a low saturated fat diet often just means making a few swaps. Because saturated fats are much less prevalent in plant foods, apart from in those three, the coconut, the palm oil and cacao butter, when we swap for meat alternatives and dairy alternatives, we hugely reduce our saturated fat straight away. So swapping to find alternatives for meat and dairy can be a really, really useful way of doing that. Type 2 diabetes is something we need to be aware of because it affects more than 4 million people in the UK right now. And in the UK each week there are 185 amputations purely because of type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes often is seen as a kind of more common illness where someone goes to the doctor and is told, oh, you're pre-diabetic or you're type 2 diabetic, maybe do a bit more exercise, maybe eat a bit more healthy. But we're not realising what huge risk there is with this, and it is one of the major causes of premature death in this country because it blocks the body from functioning in the best way that it can. And the medication for type 2 diabetes can actually cause other side effects. So what we're seeing here is that it's a really, really big deal for our long-term physical and mental health. And one of the best things we can do is to reduce the saturated fats in our diet. So we need to be able to know, okay, how is it I can utilize nutrition labels and food labels to find the simplest, easiest and best way to make this possible for me? So we want to find a way of knowing, is this product going to harm my body, or is it going to support my body to have the best of health and well-being? Within a food label, this involves us being able to identify where are the saturated fats. The saturated fats are the ones causing the risk, and therefore we want to have ideally less than 20 grams. That's from that government recommendation. Whereas on the other side of this, we've got our unsaturated fats, our really useful, incredible, nourishing fats that are essential for the body. And if you look at the UK government recommendations right now, we want to have a minimum of 40 grams. That means at least 40 grams a day. So here we see a recommendation of a target, 40 minimum, ideally more. And here we have a less than. So it's here written into the nutrition labels, into the food labels, but unless we are informed, we cannot empower our choice. So here we are. Let's have a little look at a label and see how this works. So on the nutrition label, what you will see is the word fats, and underneath it, it will say of which saturates. There is no legal requirement for the unsaturated fats to be listed on a product, and it's because these are nourishing, whereas these ones are harmful. These ones cause the risk. So there is a legal requirement for the food industry to inform us of how much saturated fat is in it, ideally so that we can choose to have less of it or be aware of where it is in our diet. So this really highlights for me that a nutrition label is literally there as a warning label. They don't have to tell us what's good, they only have to tell us what's not so good. So you will find it will say fats and it will say of which saturates. Some labels will say mono and poly. Monosaturates and poly, these are our unsaturated fats. These are our ones that are really, really useful. And the reason that they're starting to list these on some products is because they're a high fat product, so they end up with a red label on the front for fat. However, all the fat is this useful stuff. I had a very lovely friend who was trying to lose weight, so she stopped eating all nuts and stopped eating all seeds because on the front of those packets it had a red label on it. So she thought, well, if I want to lose weight, then I shouldn't eat the fats. They've got a red label on, I won't have them. It's completely not true. We have to start turning it into what is nourishing, and what's nourishing is having the mono and polyunsaturated fats. So this is our fat test. We'll look at 100 grams because then we can compare. And the sort of principle here is trying to work out, is it high in saturated fat? Is it potentially high in damaged oils? And then the question from here is there something then I could swap to? Or I might want to think about the portion size. I might want to think about maybe having a little bit less of it. So if I was to take like a can of coconut milk as an example, an entire can of coconut milk has something like 40 grams of saturated fat in. That's quite a lot of saturated fat. However, if I use one whole tin of coconut milk to make a curry that serves 4 or 5 people, or myself over a few meals over the week, that's not so bad. So it's not like I can have it, can't have it. It's this question of how much of it do I want to have, and what is it I might swap to instead. What I most frequently use now is, rather than opening a tin of coconut milk, I use something called coconut block, and it's a solid block, and I can just grate what I want in, and then I don't have the pressure of trying to use the whole tin. So there are different ways to swap and tweak here to find ways that really work for us. So we're going to begin by looking at some flaxseed. You can tell that I get through flaxseed because I buy it in these enormous bags. So if I was to look at the flaxseed here, one of the, if you take anything from this session, please just eat some more flaxseed. I buy it in the ground milled form because it's much easier for the body to digest. So either chew it very well or buy it in the milled ground form, or put it in your blender, whatever. So if we look at in 100 grams of flaxseed, the total amount of fat it's telling me here is 42 grams. So I might look at that and say, wow, it's high in fat, I shouldn't have it, So let's deep dive this a little bit further. How much saturated fat is in it? So underneath it has to legally tell me there's 3.7 grams of saturated fat in 100 grams of this. That's all the information it gives me. So we do a little calculation here. And I think of it like this. If the whole product is 42 grams, and this 3.7, this very, very small bit at the end here, is the saturated fats, then the entire rest of it must be these unsaturated fats. So that's coming in around, I'm just going to do it roughly, around 39 grams, something like that, 39, 38 grams. So here we have our flaxseed, small amount of saturated fat, huge amount of the most useful thing we can possibly put into our body to feed our brain. So flaxseed is an absolute winner for adding into our diet. Now this little question here of is it high in damaged oils, the way we ask that is by asking on the ingredient list, are we seeing oil? Now on the ingredient list of this particular bag, it's just 100% flaxseed, which means that it's not damaged oil. It's coming in its whole food form. So it's not a damaged oil. So the flaxseed is an absolute winner for some of the best ways I can consume fats. Now let's have a little look at some unsalted butter. So if we look in the butter, on the fats, the total amount of fat is 82 grams. So it's very, very high in fat, but what kind of fat? That's the question that matters. Now, of which saturates the high risk damaging fats that the body doesn't need, there are 52 grams of saturated fat in 100 grams of butter. So that's more than twice our daily amount that we need. So this is where we're starting to think, okay, I would definitely want to be portion sizing this in small amounts. I don't want to be eating huge amounts of butter. Now, if we were to do the math on this, just to work out the mono or poly unsaturated fats, the difference between these numbers and our difference here is around 30 grams. So we are getting some useful fats and we are getting some high risk fats. If I was to look on this one, it doesn't have any oils, so it's not got any damaged oils in it. So I'm getting some useful stuff, but quite a significant amount of high risk stuff. Let's compare this to coconut oil, because you know, coconut oil has got, it's all the rage, isn't it? So let's have a see. So the coconut oil, as we would expect, the fat is 100 grams because it is a container of oil. That's what this is. So we're expecting it all to be fats, and of which saturates, if I look on this, it is 87.8 grams. So we can see here it's even higher in saturated fats than butter, and it doesn't tell me anything else about the fat. So what about the mono or polyunsaturated fats? Well, if I do the difference between these two numbers, 87, we're talking around 12 grams approximately. And the thing is here, the question is, well, is this made of a damaged oil? Has this been extracted and refined? And the answer is yes. So this here has the high risk of being damaged because it's been extracted from the coconut. It's not in the whole coconut. So coconut oil has a much higher amount of saturated fat than butter does and has the risk of the damaged oils. So this is where we have to question, what is it we're told about fats and oils? What are they comparing it to? And what is actually nourishing? So you can take this fat test into your cupboards, into your weekly shop to notice, okay, where is the saturated fat and am I getting enough unsaturated fats? I would say focusing on your unsaturated fats is a really important start to begin, because your body cannot function without them. Your body cannot take good care of itself without these unsaturated fats. So if we bring this into some highlights for the week, things to put into your life in the days ahead, focus on adding, where are you getting in your nuts? Where are you getting in your seeds? Can you add in flaxseed, ideally around 1 tablespoon? And you might find some really new and delicious ways to add these in. So it could be around discovering how you might make dips, dressings and sauces using nuts and seeds. It's very easy, very delicious. All you kind of need is a blender and an idea of which flavour you might want to add. So we're adding in our nuts and seeds, and we might be taking a little journey to swap some of the things that could be higher in saturated fats. So here it could be our beige snack swap. I think of like all the packets that are shiny on the outside but just beige on the inside. That beige pretty much means that there's probably no fibre, it's probably made of a refined flour, and it's probably got sugar and oil added to it. So beige snack swap, and this could be a great place to add in our nuts or add in our seeds. Between now and the next session, there is also the invitation to experience being dairy free for 3 days. Now, if I said to you, don't eat any carrots for the next 3 days, you'd be like, bit weird, but all right, probably do that. But when I say 3 days dairy free, if you think of things like cheese, milk, butter, this is where often people can be like, not the cheese, anything but the cheese. And this is kind of why we're doing it. One, because when we go dairy free, we naturally hugely reduce the amount of saturated fats in our diet like that. And there's so many different dairy alternatives now, it can be a very easy and accessible way to do this. The other part, and we'll look at this more in detail in the next session, is, well, why is it we have this like intense relationship with dairy where it's like, not the cheese, I can't give up the cheese? What's actually going on there? What often happens when people do these dairy-free 3 days is that they experience a much more comfortable digestion, much more alertness, much more focus, improved energy levels, and so much more. So this isn't a you have to do it and you're not allowed and all that old boring chat. This is what might it feel like in your body, in your mind, in your being, to find alternatives just for 3 days to find out how it actually feels. So this is your opportunity for finding out. Adding in nuts and seeds, swapping the beigey snack things, experiencing 3 days dairy free, and as we began with at the start of this session, this idea of actually acknowledging, and maybe even, outrageous I know, celebrating yourself and your choices. This can be done simply by choosing to focus on, okay, well, what worked? What felt good? What am I enjoying? What am I noticing? And this doesn't mean that, say you do, eat some stuff or engage in some things that you actually aren't glad about, and isn't working for you. You don't have to ignore those things, but you can ask yourself, okay, well, next time I'd like to. So then each experience allows us to have the opportunity to make new choices. So we're creating this self-supporting relationship with ourselves. Celebrate your shopping, celebrate your choices. Ask yourself, what's working? What feels good? What are you enjoying? What are you noticing? Okay, that didn't go quite the way you'd have chosen. Next time, what is it you'd like to do? What would you like to choose? What would you like to experience? And with these questions, this is where change starts to happen in a way that actually feels good. And when it feels good, we can keep on doing it. Thank you for joining this session. I hope you've reaped in many useful bits of information. Hope you feel very excited to add more nuts and seeds into your diet. And if you are looking for extra support or one-to-one work, please just get in touch. And if you want to ask a question, you can email it over to me and I'll be able to do a video reply. In the next session, we'll be working with protein, and then we'll have covered all 3 of the macronutrients. So enjoy discovering, enjoy adding, enjoy swapping, and see you again soon.